Top CIA officials are giving major warnings about the Trump regime's operations relating to Iran, the fact that Israel fabricated evidence that Donald Trump was going to be assassinated aboard the old Air Force One, and how the CIA's intelligence showed that Israel was lying to Donald Trump to get him to re-engage, and how gullible Donald Trump is. CIA's warning about Donald Trump's gullibility and Netanyahu's continued ability to be able to manipulate Donald Trump. The CIA is giving top warnings about black ops taking place in Ecuador right now. There are war crimes taking place. There are active military operations in Ecuador with the dictator there, Daniel Noboa, is the dictator, authoritarian leader of Ecuador. You have the CIA giving warnings right now about the Trump regime's threats against Cuba. The CIA intelligence making it pretty clear that Cuba has a counterintelligence apparatus of a superpower, and that despite Donald Trump's discussions with others in the Trump regime of Raul Castro's grandson, the Trump regime would be very naive to believe that regime change in Cuba is going to be very easy. And so you have these top CIA officials leaking to the New York Times, leaking to the Washington Post, leaking to the Miami Herald and others about the fatal mistakes the Trump regime is making. I want to go through this with you in a very detailed way, and this is part of our continuing coverage about these warnings from the CIA about how, frankly, dangerous, incapable, incompetent Donald Trump is. Let's start off with the Netanyahu manipulation of Donald Trump. Washington Post got this exclusive. I mean, you know the story by now. Donald Trump sneaks out of old Air Force One in a catering truck with Natalie Harp. He's terrified that Iran's going to blow up old Air Force One with missiles they can fire from their shoulders, which Netanyahu says is going to happen. Here's what we know actually happened. The CIA had very low confidence that this was a real threat. CIA doesn't believe that Iran actually wants to kill Donald Trump. They want to torture Donald Trump. They want to make Donald Trump's life miserable. But Iran views Donald Trump as an asset to them in the sense that Trump is killing the United States military. He's killing American alliances, and he's strengthening Iran. So Iran really doesn't really want a replacement, given how awful Donald Trump is for in terms of projecting U.S. strength. CIA had low confidence in Iranian threat before Trump switched planes in Turkey. CIA had doubts about Israeli intelligence. In fact, let's just be blunt, the CIA knew that Netanyahu was fabricating these threats, is what really went down. U.S. intelligence officials were skeptical of an Iranian assassination threat against Donald Trump that was relayed by Israel and prompted this extraordinary clandestine maneuver where Donald Trump went into the food truck, the catering container. The assassination threat was relayed by the Israeli government to the Donald Trump and the CIA, where analysts did not view the intelligence as compelling. They conveyed the skepticism to Trump, but nonetheless, Donald Trump was played by Netanyahu and trusted Netanyahu over the CIA. By the way, Donald Trump previously trusted Putin over the advice of our CIA. Another official called the reports of threats against Trump's life Israel-derived, not U.S.-generated, very low confidence. The doubts in some quarters about an imminent threat to the president add a new element to just how embarrassing and utterly humiliating this was. Glenn Greenwald says, so if I have this right, the CIA itself understands and is saying that Israel manufactures false intelligence to make Trump fear non-existent threats from Iran so that we will continue to use American resources and sacrifice service members to fight Israel's wars for them against Iran. See, that's what the CIA is saying. Yes. Joe Kent, who used to be top-level person within Donald Trump's office for the Director of National Intelligence, he was the number 2. He was Tulsi Gabbard's right hand. MAGA Republican Joe Kent says the story of Trump secretly switching airplanes is actually a great example of how we got into the war with Iran. Israel-derived, not U.S.-generated, and viewed as low confidence by the CIA. So we've got that right there. Now, at the same time as well, in addition to the fabricated evidence, we have the former CIA director, John Brennan, saying that White House, Donald Trump, had an ethical requirement to tell reporters about the plane swap. Other CIA officers are saying the same. They said this could have been done very easily. If Trump was going to leave old Air Force One and get on the new plane because of the threats against old Air Force One, all Trump had to do was tell the reporters, hey, let's go off the record. There are threats. Here's the intelligence. We want to let you know you can't report on this because it's a matter of national intelligence. The reporters would likely agree that it would be kept off the record, and they would figure out the best way to protect the reporter's safety if there was truly a genuine threat. John Brennan and others point out this actually happened when former President Clinton was in office and he was taking a trip to Pakistan, and Clinton told the reporters what the situation was. He alerted them in advance that he would be taking a private plane. Everybody knew what was actually happening, so everybody's lives were taken care of. They followed the intelligence. He did it ethically, and the reporters kept it confidential. Actually, they kept it confidential for decades. They just revealed they were aware about it now because Donald Trump handled the situation so terribly by throwing our reporters under the bus and leaving them on the plane that Donald Trump believed was going to be blown up, despite it being based on Israeli fabricated intelligence. So we've got that. I'll talk to you I want to talk about Ecuador because it's such a really scary story about what's going on in Ecuador. But first, I want to share this with you as well. Wall Street Journal, well-sourced article talks about how North Korea has quietly infiltrated lots of American companies. They placed thousands of IT workers in U.S. companies using stolen identities, AI, and American intermediaries. Workers use AI to create resumes, answer interview questions, and even alter their appearance. Some reportedly earn up to $300,000 a year, with as much as $90,000 flowing back to North Korea. Estimates put operations at up to $800 million annually, potentially helping fund Pyongyang's weapons programs. Now, this is being leaked to the Wall Street Journal by our intelligence community as well, warning that Donald Trump's FBI and counterintelligence is not working the way it needs to be working. Remember, we hired that guy who was like an intern. The guy was like literally a 23-year-old guy with no experience. He leads the counter efforts here in the United States, and who doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Robert, was it Fugate III? So you've got that going on. Let's talk about the situation in Ecuador right now. There are troops in Ecuador right now taking place in massive military operations. I want you to be aware of what's taking place over here. You have Ecuador, again, run by Noboa, right-wing dictator in Ecuador. This is what they just posted yesterday. Armed forces of Ecuador and the United States destroy mafia threat. Operation Northern Piranha deployed surveillance and control actions in certain areas in the northern border, specifically in the province of Esmeraldas, to neutralize activities linked to organized crime. The National Intelligence Center participated in this operation. So there's active U.S. troops that are actually engaged like in a war in Ecuador. Now, Ecuador and Trump claim that it's bringing down narco-terrorists, but the reality is that the narco-terrorist claim just seems like it's pretext for going after Noboa's political enemies and just going after people who Donald Trump and Noboa don't want to be alive. The Washington Post got this scoop. Covert CIA program said to be behind mysterious attacks on Galapagos boats. A surveillance plane flew from El Salvador toward the fishing boats before drones attacked, flight data showed. And this flight was linked to a shell company, LLC, in the United States. I want to talk through what's going on there in Ecuador because there was it's a covert action program, and it was someone familiar with the covert action program who told this to the Washington Post, which leads me to believe that it was someone pretty high up in the CIA who leaked what was going down. Hat tip to Washington Post for this scoop as well. The Washington Post has solved the months-long mystery of attacks on 3 fishing boats near Galapagos. They're part of a covert CIA program with a spy plane with its ownership hidden behind an LLC oriented toward each boat before the strikes. A covert CIA black op program was behind these drone strikes on Ecuadorian fishing boats. A classified CIA operation was responsible for a series of these lethal drone strikes targeting Ecuadorian fishing vessels near Galapagos Islands. These were not drug ships. There's not narco traffickers. By the way, even if they were drug ships, in my view, you just can't start killing people. You interdict, you arrest, you give due process, you throw people in prison, you put the full force and effect of law. You don't just start killing everybody. But in any event, these aren't drug boats. These were just fishing boats. As Camilla Lourdes Galarza, she's been doing some great reporting lately, explains, in April, I was the first journalist to publish an in-depth investigation covering 3 mysterious boat strikes, abductions in the Galapagos. Now a source tells Washington Post it was part of a CIA covert operation. Obviously, it's coming from the CIA source, warning about what the hell's going on over there as we're putting our service members' lives at risk, and they are engaged in war crimes and they're killing innocent people over there. Last month, I released NASA images evidence of the bombing you see below. Also, Camilla Lourdes Galarza also broke down the story about how the prosecutor investigating U.S. boat strikes and torture allegations in Ecuador was assassinated. And of course, she uncovered the NASA images and videos of the U.S. Coast Guard that corroborates the victims' testimonies. Then the prosecutors working the case were shot and killed in broad daylight. Let's just talk about what the Washington Post is reporting. There were these mysterious strikes on Ecuadorian fishing boats near Galapagos in early 2026. It turns out it was part of a CIA program. There was a January 20th, 2026 strike. Ecuadorian fishing boat, the Fiorella, disappeared near Galapagos. 8 crew members remain missing and are presumed dead. March 17, 2026, the Negra Francisca Duarte II was attacked. March 26, 2026, the Don Maca was attacked. These were distinct, separate incidents as well. And these were not necessarily part of the Operation Southern Spear. These were their own kind of incidents as well. Survivors from the March incidents told the Washington Post that a small quadcopter drones either dropped explosive onto the boats or crashed into them and exploded. A larger drone was described circling overhead. After the vessels were disabled or sunk, the fishermen said they were picked up by a nearby vessel. Armed English-speaking men. Some accounts reference uniforms with American flag patches, hooded and cuffed them. They were transported to El Salvador. They were then returned to Ecuador. And then these survivors were kind of tortured and they were terrorized since they've been back to Ecuador. Flight tracking data analyzed by the Washington Post showed a high-tech business jet described as a Cessna Citation flying from an airport in El Salvador toward the locations of the boats on the days of the incidents and in preceding days. The aircraft arrived in El Salvador from Tennessee on November 2025. It flew under a U.S. registration number not listed in standard FAA records. These boats didn't have drugs on them, and the CIA was apparently involved in this and involved in these operations. And then the prosecutor who was investigating it was killed. Okay, and so Washington Post got the exclusive, tying this all together. And again, it seems that the sources are coming from top CIA officials. Now, also, we've been learning about the new CIA task force on Cuba, And what we're learning over here is that the CIA assessment is how, this is what the Miami Herald reports as well, that Cuba is considered a hard target, a place difficult to operate in and where officers have faced significant harassment. In late 2016, CIA officers stationed in Havana were among the first hit by Havana syndrome incidents that prompted the agency to close its station. The Biden administration reportedly reopened it in 2024. Cuban intelligence and counterintelligence services were recently described by Marco Rubio as equal to those of a superpower and have a history of penetrating the U.S. government and running CIA-recruited assets as double agents. Now, the Trump regime is speaking to Raul Castro's grandson, Raul Guillermo Rodriguez Castro, as they think that they can set him up as the replacement. But what these top officials have been warning, CIA officials, is just what they've warned in Iran, that Cuba won't readily accept a U.S. puppet. And the Cuba history of resistance is such that they're not going to easily break. And so you've got, Ecuador, Iran, Israel, North Korea, a lot going on there with some of those latest warnings from the CIA. Tell me what you think. Get your copy of WTF America, pre-order now. Appreciate you for watching. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million.
Hey, if you want the full story, how democracy got here and how we take it back, pre-order our new book, WTF America, today. Just scan the QR code or click the link in the description. Let's do this.